Professional tennis players cheat frequently. Some of the biggest cheaters in tennis are Stefanos Tsitsipas, Coco Gauff, and Rafael Nadal. The sport's growing match-fixing problem and current suspension frenzy are not my focus. Assess doping suspected tennis players. Instead, the more mundane but pervasive and unavoidable infraction that officials have mostly ignored for decades: off-court coach. It may surprise you that mid-match coaching has never been allowed in tennis, unlike almost every other professional sport. Coaches, often within whisper distance of their players during matches, are prohibited from providing any strategy or advice, even as simple as telling them to drink more water. This rule is rarely enforced and almost impossible to administer, but it has had disastrous consequences for players suspected of doing so. A potentially historic rule change that, while closing one loophole, theoretically opens the door to a host of other logistical and ethical issues by removing the final barrier that separated player from coach and tennis from its famed reputation as the last gladiator-esque major sport. To understand why this regulation change is so important to the tennis world, remember that the championships Wimbledon only reluctantly allowed women to wear non-white undergarments beneath their tennis whites last year after 145 years. Tennis purists value tradition, including the idea that a match's outcome depends solely on the player's physical and mental efforts, a true-life version of chess, where a player must act as commander, strategist, and executive. The isolated settings have crowned winners not only for their playing talent, but also for their mental strength to persevere and push through even the hardest challenges with only their thoughts. So that should work, theoretically. To call mid-match coaching from the stands an open secret is generous. It's often clear to on-court officials implementing the regulation. It admits it. Tony Nadal, Rafael Nadal's uncle and longtime coach, said, "I talked to Rafa during matches. I know that it's not allowed, but I think at my age, I have nothing to hide." Stefanos Tsitsipas added, "In my case, it has always been part of how I do things when I'm on the court." There's a reason they've always been able to do so. Enforcing the rule consistently and properly is logistically impossible. Not to mention the chair umpire's difficulty overhearing low English conversations when a player passes their coach across the court. No matter the language, all tournaments foster communication. If you were refereeing this match, which player should receive the code violation? The 2022 Australian Open saw Greek official Eva Azdaraki secretly stationed in the tunnel underneath his father coach, Apostolos Tsitsipas's player box, due to Tsitsipas's non-English coaching disguises encouragement. Stefanos received a coaching code violation fast. Was that the final answer? A hidden listening device to record all coach-player conversations? Hardly. Tennis coach Nick Bollettieri once gave his players a card with the meanings of his many mid-match motions. Disregarding his eyeglasses would mean hit more to the opponent's forehand, while coughing may mean play more defensively. Out of options and patience, it seemed that submissive chair umpires and players who accepted non-discreet coaching, as long as it wasn't obvious or done often, had reached an unspoken truce, similar to policemen monitoring speeding cars on a highway. They were fine, crossed the line, and they're fined, as Maria Sharapova did in the 2006 US Open final. As spectators and television viewers watched, Sharapova's father Yuri and hitting partner Michael Joyce held up 4 fingers and a banana during the match, presumably to signal her to drink 4 electrolyte bottles and eat a banana, which she did. The Russian later downplayed the incident as minor following her big win. However, she admitted that the signs were as expected. However, the WTA later found Sharapova's team's activities weren't coaching. In response to this event, Larry Scott, then WTA CEO, admitted for the first time. Still, communication from players' boxes is increased. It's very difficult to interpret and police. Legalizing coaching would solve the problem, but most policymakers, executives, and players, including Sharapova, still considered any change to the coaching rule sacrilegious. Stacey Alister, who was poised to become the WTA's next president and CEO, was invited to a high-level meeting with ESPN executives less than a year before the Sharapova incident to discuss how to improve the WTA's gray image, presentation, and market penetration. ESPN offered mid-match coaching to the WTA in 2005 to stay relevant in the hyper-competitive professional sports landscape. Stacey stated in a 2017 interview that the ESPN meeting and subsequent reflection clarified, "Why not include that in the program if it's already done?" As part of its Roadmap 2010 master plan, a seismic initiative to make the struggling WTA Tour more fan and television friendly, the WTA pioneered and tested legal mid-match coaching, allowing coaches to visit their players on court once per set during 90-second changeovers or medical timeouts, which were broadcast to viewers. WTA coaches received iPads during real-time Hawkeye matches. They might better advise their players utilizing computer-generated tactical and positional data, like where the opponent preferred to serve or who was winning rallies longer than 10 strokes. After a highly publicized and controversial incident at the 2018 US Open final where Serena Williams was penalized for receiving off-court coaching, which she denied, but her coach Patrick Mouratoglou confirmed. "Well, I'm honest. I was coaching. The WTA allowed unfiltered off-court coaching from the stands in 2020, along with other progressive rule and policy implementations, firmly positioning the WTA. The decade-long experiment with coaching principles drew scorn and ire for some of the embarrassing situations caught on camera. The coaching went ignored when preconceived assumptions were set aside, according to most pundits. Many saw the positives. Not only could advice and strategy provided throughout the match improve the overall quality of play, but it could also make the sport more enjoyable for TV viewers, especially newcomers. This shift toward teamwork has its benefits. Players have been used to external support in college tennis, Davis Cup, Fed Cup, and even World Team Tennis. But many see the Laver Cup's runaway financial and viewership success as proof that a new play structure with coaching could revitalize the aging sport. Of course, not everyone agreed. In 2017, Wimbledon chief executive Richard Lewis said, "I'm not aware of any evidence of the WTA allowing it making any difference to the attractiveness of their tour. We are philosophically very against it." The ATP and 4 Grand Slams continued to oppose mid-match coaching. How is it that 6 often at-war entities have all started testing off-court coaching 6 years later? Unsurprisingly, it all relates to a familiar figure. After leaving the WTA in 2015, Alister became the chief executive of professional tennis in the USA, overseeing the US Open Series, a series of prominent North American tournaments, and the US Open, which she was named tournament director for in 2012. Change was her priority. In 2017, Alister tested off-court coaching during the qualifying draw at the Open, along with countdown clocks to accelerate play. She said she was supported to try on court teaching in a Grand Slam atmosphere, comparable to the WTA at the time, even though other Grand Slam officials and the ATP Player Council thought it was too avant-garde. Critics, fans, and players were initially skeptical, but 90% of eligible qualifiers received off-court tutoring when available. A pandemic-fueled rise in off-court coaching infractions, aided by a lack of crowds, coaches whose masks concealed their lips, and an absence of line umpires who would normally report the rule breaking, replaced by Hawkeye Live electronic line calling, like dominoes, led the ATP, Australian Open, French Open, and Wimbledon to trial off-court coaching, ending the long-standing hypocrisy. This is nice, right? Slow down. The current WTA official rulebook states, brief verbal coaching is allowed only when a player is at the same end of the court as her designated player-coach box. What's brief? The New York Times allows a few words and phrases, but no talks. How do you define a conversation? At the 2023 Cincinnati Masters, Carlos Alcaraz and coach Juan Carlos Ferrero had a 20-second conversation. First serve and hit his forehand. Dean Goldfine, Ben Shelton's traveling coach, said, "It's a little ridiculous just from that standpoint, just a big gray area." In its current form, regulating previously illegal behavior may only push forward the boundary. Coaches and players will continue to toe on the court, rekindling the same issues that prompted the rule change. This assumes every athlete can afford a traveling coach with professional level understanding, which few can. A player ranked outside the top 1 to 200 rarely travels full-time with any staff, as the minimum cost of $45,000 to $75,000 for yearly salary and travel for one coach is too high for most lower-ranked players who struggle to feed themselves. According to an ITF analysis from 2013, male players needed a break-even rating of 336 in the world to cover food and travel costs without coaching. A 253 break-even rating was worse for women. Tennis income inequality aside, the point is that rather than leveling the stakes by removing mid-match coaching penalties, which maintain tennis's reputation as a gladiatorial contest in which players had to problem-solve under pressure on their own, a top-ranked players coach could be the deciding factor in a close match against a financially struggling opponent. As evidenced by the ongoing testing of free real-time data tablets and recent advances in AI technology, the best of the best may soon seek the courtside advice of professional data analysts who can offer data-driven strategy and tips based solely on calculations and AI models, akin to a new Moneyball strategy. Former #1 Jim Courier said, "I worry about richer players getting richer. I think about players who come down and play qualifying and cannot even travel with a coach and get in and go up against someone with 4 coaches. Off-court, on-court, mid-match coaching, whatever the governing body calls it after its trial period, until it's the law. It's short-sighted to think a public consensus will soon be reached in the foreseeable future. Many still think highly of it due to tennis's non-compromise traditions and unwillingness to change in contrast to the modernized world that surrounds it. That mindset is likely restricting the sport's capacity to expand and remain relevant in consumers' views." Although audiences initially hated tie-break deciders, big video screens, and electronic line judge technology, they may accept this for improvement. This concludes the video for the day. Have you enjoyed it? Please leave your insightful response in the section below labeled comments. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional informative and engaging videos.